Hey guys, tonight we will step down into the cold stone corridors beneath Westminster Abbey, where time seems to stand still and the air is heavy with untold secrets. Imagine a flickering candle casting trembling shadows on the damp walls, hinting at what lies hidden below. The lead coffin of Queen Elizabeth I, sealed for centuries, concealing a gruesome truth that the glorious portraits of the Golden Age never dared to reveal. And trust me, when you hear everything the investigators discovered, you might find yourself thinking, I might not survive this story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. By the way, leave me a comment to let me know where you are watching from and what time it is where you live. I really love seeing the night owl community spread across every time zone. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes and imagine yourself standing before the heavy door of Westminster Abbey. The cold stone has witnessed hundreds of years of secrets, and right beneath your feet, deep below, lies the lead coffin of Elizabeth I, once called the Virgin Queen, the symbol of an entire golden age. But instead of noble rest, the story of her body turned into a chemical tragedy that lasted for centuries. Official historical records note, Elizabeth died on the 24th of March, 1603, after nearly 45 years of reign. At that moment, England entered a new era, with the Stuarts taking the throne. But few know that her final hours were far from peaceful. She refused to lie down on her bed, believing that if she touched the mattress, death would strike immediately. And so for many days she staggered on swollen legs, like a ghost struggling with fate. One detail few pay attention to. The smooth white powder on her face that you often see in portraits was actually mixed from lead. Yes, lead. The very thing you would never want in your lipstick or blush today. It corroded her flesh, leaving her face cracked like old plaster, and a pungent smell that forced her ladies-in-waiting to cover their noses with scented cloths. If social media existed back then, surely people would rush to unfollow such a beauty secret of self-destruction. Historians still debate the true cause of Elizabeth's decline. Some argue that dropsy, swelling caused by heart or kidney failure, was the main culprit. Others believe that the long-term use of toxic cosmetics heavily poisoned her body. Either way, the end was that she could no longer eat, could not speak. Her hair fell out in clumps, and her breath reeked of death. Do you feel a chill down your spine? Try to relate. It's like when you keep drinking ultra-strong coffee every day to look alert for work, but at night you suffer endless insomnia. Elizabeth was the same, except instead of coffee, she used lead powder, and instead of losing sleep, she lost her real face. Just a little joke, but think about it. It really was a kind of beauty at all costs. Aid. When Elizabeth finally collapsed in the early morning, her body immediately fell into the hands of the court. Although she had once requested to depart simply, her body was quickly processed by the embalmers. This was also the official custom. Monarchs were always embalmed to prolong the funeral and maintain a majestic image. But from that very moment, Elizabeth's so-called eternal sleep turned into an unwilling chemical experiment. They cut open her abdomen, removed heart, liver, intestines, and lungs. The liver was yellow, the heart swollen, the womb shrunken. Images showing the body had long been exhausted. Then they pushed a metal rod through her nose, breaking bone to extract the brain, a procedure chilling even to hear. And the result was not the brain of a brilliant queen, but only greyish, foul-smelling mush. But don't worry, I won't go into too much detail so you can still sleep tonight. A strange thing is that after removing the organs, they washed the body with wine and vinegar, then stuffed it with sawdust, herbs, and resins. The intention was to cover the smell, but in reality, it turned the body into a pressure cooker filled with reactive substances. If compared to modern times, it was like cramming batteries, perfume, and leftovers into one sealed box and leaving it in the sun. Sooner or later, it would explode. Historians still debate whether royal embalming rituals truly aimed to preserve the body or were merely visual theatre for the funeral. Some sources claim that Elizabeth's face was so ruined it could not be displayed, forcing them to cover it with wax and crown her with a bright red wig, a fake copy, so that the public, looking from afar, thought she remained intact. Truly the filter version of the 17th century. No Instagram, so they used beeswax and makeup. You can imagine the funeral that day as a grand performance. A lead coffin draped in red velvet, a procession marching across London, incense smoke thick in the air to mask the smell. But beneath the splendor, the coffin had become a chemical furnace. When sunlight struck, toxic gases built up, and small holes had to be drilled to release pressure. People heard the hiss and thought it was the wind through cracks, but in fact it was the body decomposing. It sounds like horror fiction, but it is actually historical record. One detail few know: when the coffin was placed in the crypt alongside Mary I, her half-sister and one-time rival, they were stacked on top of each other. Enemies in life finally fused together in death. This sight made many think of fate's irony. The Protestant Reformation Queen and the Catholic Queen, now only a mixture of lead, wax, and bone fragments. Do you find that fascinating? History sometimes resembles a dark play, where even the most powerful characters end in grotesque images. If you told this story in a modern cafe, many would think it was just the latest Netflix release. And this was only the beginning of the secret inside the coffin. Centuries later, when the crypt was reopened, things became even more horrific. But for now, take a deep breath. Because this journey is still long, and what lies within that lead box will make you reconsider the very idea of resting in glory from a very different angle. Let your imagination wander into the scene of 1868, when Westminster Abbey had endured countless stormy winters and sweltering summers. The people of Victorian London were fascinated by everything related to death, from taking photographs with the deceased to collecting hair in lockets. And so, under irresistible curiosity, the Dean of the Abbey, Arthur Stanley, ordered the opening of Elizabeth's coffin vault. The official historical event is that in that very year, renovation works in the Henry VII Chapel allowed access to the Queen's tomb. But the hidden reason was a thirst for knowledge, and also a touch of morbid amusement, of the Victorians. They wanted to see with their own eyes whether the famous Queen still retained her dignity after more than 2 centuries. When the heavy stone was lifted, the air below burst forth like a punch to the face. Dampness, a sharp, sour smell, a mixture of old wine, rotting resin, and death. Workers had to wear crude filter masks, but they worked no better than the paper masks you wear on dusty streets. Some vomited on the spot. Others grew dizzy as if stepping off a roller coaster at an amusement park. What few expected was that the 2 lead coffins of Mary and Elizabeth had fused together. Time, pressure, and decay had welded them into one mass. To separate Elizabeth, workers had to saw through metal, the screech echoing like screams. Toxic smoke escaping made many believe the Queen's souls were enraged. It sounded mystical, but in reality, it was only chemical reactions. Yet in that atmosphere, who wouldn't feel their skin crawl? Historians still debate. Was the vault opened truly for research, or simply to satisfy curiosity? Some defended Stanley, saying he wanted to clarify history, but many mocked that it was nothing more than a Victorian macabre picnic when death became a form of entertainment. If social media had existed then, the hashtag number coffin reveal would surely have trended. When the coffin lid sprang open, the sight was like a nightmare. Instead of a withered mummy as everyone imagined, they saw a tar-like black sludge, thick and sticky. Some patches of skin were dry and hard like rotting wood, others melted into slimy liquid. The red wig still clung loosely to the skull, while the wax face mask had melted and spread, sticking to bone and teeth, creating a figure half human, half wax statue. Imagine if Madame Tussaud had displayed this. It would certainly be off-limits to children under 12. Another strange detail. Inside the coffin, on the lead walls and resin lining, sparkling crystals were found, formed by reactions over hundreds of years. They looked like gemstones, but were actually the combination of stench, toxic gases, and a decomposing body. Scientists called this repeated decomposition. Tissue dried out, reabsorbed moisture, then decayed again. A cycle of death. As if Elizabeth's body refused to rest. Just think, if an Apple Watch had been strapped to Elizabeth inside the coffin, the health app would have continuously reported, "Warning, abnormal condition detected, decomposition cycle restarting." Just a joke, but it shows how absurd and terrifying the phenomenon was. Historians still debate whether such detailed records should be made public. One side argues it is important evidence of royal funeral practices and the effects of toxic cosmetics. The other side insists, the more described, the more it insults the Queen's memory. Truly an eternal dilemma. Between science and reverence, the boundary as thin as paper. Among the most frightening discoveries, perhaps the most striking, was the petrified heart. Originally removed during embalming, it reappeared in the form of a solid mass, gleaming like a gemstone of red-black streaked with silver and gold. Victorian chemists were left bewildered, not knowing whether to call it a specimen or the most grotesque jewel in the world. If auctioned today, collectors would be both desperate for it and sleepless. Do you see the irony? Elizabeth once feared death so much that she dared not lie down on her bed. Yet in the end, her very body became an endless experiment, reviving and decaying, drying and dampening again, as if death itself were mocking her. An obsession that lasted for centuries, not only for her but also for those who dared to open the vault and observe. If you are lying down listening to this story late at night, you might feel a chill run down your spine. But don't worry, no foul odor can escape from your phone or computer screen. This is the only advantage of listening to ghostly history tales in the digital age. Picture this. The stone floor of Westminster Abbey is not just a foundation. After more than 200 years, liquid from the lead coffins had seeped into every crack of brick and stone. Workers in charge of opening the vault recalled that at times, when tapping lightly on the ground, a dark brown fluid seeped out like blood of stone. Its smell? Not wine, not resin, but a blend of deathly vapor and ancient fragrance. Death, in poetic terms, had soaked into every fibre of the church's stones. Official historical records note that after the 1868 exhumation, Queen Victoria immediately ordered changes to royal funeral rites. No more elaborate embalming with toxic chemicals, no more prolonging of the burial process. Instead, everything had to be swift, to avoid repeating the chemical disaster of Elizabeth's case. This very decision laid the foundation for the modern English royal funeral. Simple, yet solemn. A strange detail few know. During the survey, scientists found bizarre crystals clinging to the coffin walls, described as faintly glowing under the oil lamps. The Victorians, being superstitious, many swore they had seen ghostly phosphorescence like willow, the wisps in the tomb. Later, chemistry explained it as a reaction of phosphorus compounds from the human body combined with heavy metals. But honestly, if you were the one carrying a lamp underground and saw glowing walls, you would also break out in a cold sweat. Historians still debate the authenticity of those records. Some argue they were only embellishments of the Victorians, who loved the macabre. But others claim that medical notes and preserved specimens partly prove that this strange phenomenon was real, a natural laboratory of decomposition, accidentally created by the tomb of a queen. Put yourself in the present-day comparison. It's like when you forget a lunchbox in a sealed cupboard for weeks, then open it to discover a new ecosystem of molds in green, red, purple, and yellow. Elizabeth's body, in a sealed lead coffin, also became its own chemical universe. The only difference is, instead of weeks, it lasted for centuries. Just a joke, but thinking about it still feels chilling. When leaving the vault, many witnesses described a strange sensation. Headaches, dizziness, even dreams of Elizabeth's face collapsing and then regenerating in their sleep. Some researchers called it a psychological effect after exposure to a toxic environment. But for the devout, they believed the Queen was still not at rest, her spirit still wandering in the Abbey. Stories of knocking sounds, whispers, or fleeting shadows began spreading across London. An interesting detail: Queen Victoria, after reading the report, was deeply shocked. She had always revered the solemnity of the royal family, but now before her was the image of a golden icon, turned into a mixture of tar and melted wax. Victoria immediately issued a decree. No one is allowed to reopen the royal tomb without just cause. This order lasted for a very long time, making many generations after almost never dare to repeat the act of 1868. You see, the irony of history lies in this. Elizabeth was once the queen who led England to the height of power, yet her physical legacy became a warning that all glory will one day melt away. that every halo will become nothing more than a faint odor inside a sealed lead box. To compare in modern terms, it is like a luxurious new phone whose battery swells after a few years and explodes. No matter how majestic, in the end, everything returns to dust. A light joke. Perhaps if Elizabeth had known she would become a patented chemical formula, she would have asked to be cremated from the very beginning. It would have spared her from being pulled out by posterity to be studied and judged like a failed experiment in a lab. Tonight, as you lie down listening to this story, pay a little attention. Every faint sound outside the window, every gust of wind through the curtains, might make you think of the hissing sounds in the lead coffin long ago. But unlike the monks of the 17th century, you are safe, because this story only echoes in imagination, helping you drift slowly into sleep. So, after you have followed me down into the Westminster tomb, witnessing the chaotic mixture of chemicals, melted wax, and strange crystals clinging to the coffin, you might be asking yourself, but in the end, how did Elizabeth become such a horrifying legacy? The answer lies in the very last years of her life, when her daily habits, from beauty routines to lifestyle, unknowingly prepared her for the final tragedy. Official historical records state that Elizabeth I was famous for her habit of using cosmetics mixed with white lead to create porcelain-like pale skin. In the Tudor period, white skin symbolized power, a mark of nobility untouched by the sun of the fields. But that very queenly powder seeped into her flesh, ulcerating her throat, corroding her face. If today you saw someone post a skincare routine clip featuring lead powder as an ingredient, the online community would immediately report it. A strange detail few notice. Elizabeth was extremely afraid of mirrors. In her final years, she had all mirrors removed from the palace, not wanting to see her own image, her cracked face, her thinning hair. Her ladies-in-waiting had to apply her makeup from memory, as though painting an imagined portrait. A queen powerful across Europe, yet forced to live like a young girl afraid of the selfie camera. That is truly a paradox. Historians still debate, was Elizabeth's obsession with mirrors born of superstition or mental illness? Some argue she believed mirrors could reflect her rotting soul, bringing death closer. Others think it was simply the psychological reaction of a powerful woman forced to watch her youth and beauty vanish too quickly. Either way, the result was that she spent her final days in a palace without mirrors, a detail both tragic and chilling. Imagine this. Every morning you wake up, look in the mirror to fix your hair, put on a bit of lipstick. Elizabeth was the opposite. She avoided mirrors, as if avoiding an enemy. Just a light joke. If she had lived in the TikTok era, she would probably have been the only one never to turn on the front camera. In addition, Elizabeth had another strange habit. She was very afraid of lying down on a bed, especially after some fortune tellers warned that the bed of sleep is the bed of death. Therefore, she often leaned or stood, even dozing off against a chair. That habit made her already swollen legs even worse. Think about it, just one sleepless night is enough to exhaust you. Elizabeth did it continuously for many days. Another habit rarely mentioned. She often used perfumes and dried flowers to mask body odor instead of bathing. Records note that for long periods, Elizabeth only dry bathed with scented cloths because she believed water could carry disease. The result was layers of cosmetics, sweat, and dirt piling up, forming what modern historians call the death mask, a mixture that worsened her health more quickly. Historians still argue about the severity of this habit. Some sources say she truly bathed only a few times a year, while others claim she still maintained hygiene, just not as frequently as today's standards. Whether true or not, clearly she had turned her body into an ideal environment for illness. If compared to modern life, we could say Elizabeth was like someone addicted to phone filters, never letting anyone see her real face, while also believing that bathing was optional. Truly a kind of lifestyle, both luxurious and obsessive. And it was precisely those terrifying habits, from avoiding mirrors, refusing the bed, to living by perfume instead of clean water, that contributed to a second death when the lead coffin was opened. Her body not only decayed, but also encapsulated an entire era of illusions about power and beauty. Those eccentric habits, accumulated, not only created Elizabeth's tragedy, but also left behind a cultural legacy still debated today. You see, A woman who was once the center of European politics, who ordered the fleet to defeat the Spanish Armada, in the end collapsed because of her everyday habits, painting her face with lead, avoiding mirrors, and an obsessive fear of the bed. Official historical records show that Elizabeth's reign is tied to the concept of England's Golden Age. Shakespearean literature, the voyages of Francis Drake, the beginnings of the British Empire, all bore her mark. Yet, on the other side, her private life was full of petty obsessions. Cultural researchers often say it was her seclusion and fear of aging that created the image of the Virgin Queen, always having to maintain a pure, immortal appearance in the eyes of her subjects. A strange detail rarely mentioned. There is an anecdote that Elizabeth kept dozens of small boxes, each containing a different powder, pigment, or perfume. They were locked away in a cabinet, and only she had the key. When she wanted to use them, she ordered her ladies-in-waiting to take out each jar like a religious ritual. To her, it was not simply beauty, but a mask of power to cover the cracks of age and illness. Sounds like an early version of a Tudor beauty influencer, except the advertised products were 100 times more toxic. Historians still debate. Did the title Virgin Queen truly reflect her private life, or was it only a political strategy? Some records hint she had relationships with the Earl of Leicester, or even other courtiers, but others insist. All of it was speculation, since Elizabeth's unmarried image helped her avoid entanglements and consolidate power. Whatever the result, clearly she lived her whole life in a golden cage of her own making, where beauty, power, and fear blended into a legend both radiant and horrifying. Relating it to the present, it is like modern celebrities always having to keep a flawless image on social media, never daring to post a bare-faced morning selfie. Elizabeth was the same, except instead of Instagram or TikTok, she had an entire court and nation as her audience. And the consequences were far more serious. The mask was not just an image, but lead powder corroding her flesh. Just a light joke. Perhaps if she lived today, Elizabeth would have been a VIP customer of luxury spas, and would certainly have sued cosmetic companies if she knew their products were filled with toxins. Unfortunately, the 16th century had no consumer protection laws. From all those strange habits, you realize a paradox. It was precisely the obsession with preserving an immortal appearance that turned Elizabeth's body into a horrific chemical artifact when she lay down. And it is also those things that leave later generations wondering, should her greatness be remembered through her victories, or through the ghastly legacy left in the tomb? Let us allow the story to keep flowing, like a candle not yet burned out. You know, when Elizabeth I is mentioned, people often think immediately of victories, thunderous speeches, and radiant portraits in elaborate gowns. But looking deeper, her life was full of hidden corners few wish to recall. Official historical event. At the end of the 16th century, the English court was engulfed by worries over succession. Elizabeth had no children, and this was a true political nightmare. Her refusal of marriage helped her keep absolute power, but it also made the entire nobility constantly anxious. Who will inherit the throne? Because of this, Elizabeth's womb, a part of the body that was private, became a subject of public debate. People speculated she was infertile, that she was ill, or even that she was not fully a woman. A strange detail few know. There were once rumors that Elizabeth was in fact a disguised prince, because the real princess had died young and the court had swapped her to save face. These stories sound like novels, but they spread so strongly that some foreign ambassadors recorded them. You could call it fake news of the 16th century, except instead of spreading on Facebook, it spread by handwritten letters and tavern gossip. Historians still debate. Were those rumors merely political tools meant to weaken Elizabeth's image before hostile forces? Many scholars believe so. Absurd tales often appear around strong leaders, especially women. But even so, they reflect another truth. Elizabeth's body no longer belonged to herself. It had become a national symbol, dissected by words and by gazes. Imagine if today there were a talk show called Gossip Tudor, broadcast on television. Surely the hottest topic would be, will Queen Elizabeth marry or not? Who is her secret lover? And the audience would sip their beer, debating as if it were the neighbour's affair. Just a joke, but enough to show the enormous pressure she lived under. That very pressure pushed Elizabeth to construct for herself an untouchable image. Fiery red hair, porcelain, white skin, magnificent clothing, hiding every sign of age. But you and I both know, no one escapes time. And when the lead coffin was opened after centuries, what appeared was no longer the glorious Virgin Queen, but clear evidence of human fragility. Ironic, isn't it? She was once the symbol of England's endurance, but her body became a vivid example of the cruel truth. All power will eventually decay. Do you hear the night wind slipping through the window? That faint sound, if you were sitting in an old abbey like Westminster, might make your heart beat a little faster. Because for centuries, people have whispered about the ghost of Elizabeth I, the most powerful queen, yet full of obsessions and loneliness, still unable to find rest. The ghost legend in the abbey, official historical event. After Elizabeth I died in 1603, she was buried in Westminster Abbey, directly above the tomb of Mary I, her half-sister who had once been a formidable rival in the struggle for power. It was thought that death would close all hostilities, but this arrangement created a heavy layer of symbolism. Two opposing queens, now lying on top of each other, as if fate had bound them forever. A strange detail. Monks in the 17th century once recorded that they sometimes heard soft weeping underground, near the tomb. Officially, it was explained as the sound of rats gnawing at coffins, or toxic gases seeping from metal. But those who lived in the abbey for many years swore the sound was exactly like a woman sighing. If you were walking in the abbey at night and imagined hearing someone whisper, "Not yet, not yet," by your ear, surely you would run straight outside. Historians still debate whether any supernatural phenomenon truly occurred. The rationalist side says all sounds can be explained mechanically: metal expanding, wind whistling, rats digging. But the other side points out there were too many witnesses across different centuries telling similar experiences. So perhaps the ghost of Elizabeth exists, not as a supernatural being but as a collective symbol in human memory, a shared obsession hard to erase. When history becomes legend, imagine a night in the late 18th century when a group of schoolchildren were taken to Westminster Abbey to learn history. The teacher pointed to the tomb of Elizabeth and Mary, recounting the story of the two rival sisters. And at that very moment, a moaning sound rose, like wind through a flute. The whole group panicked. Some screamed, some cried, some even fainted. That story spread outside, became an anecdote, then a legend. Another strange detail. In the 19th century, pilgrims to London claimed that when standing before Elizabeth's tomb, they felt the stone floor beating beneath their feet, as if with a heartbeat. Hard to believe, yet many independent reports recorded the same. Perhaps it was only an illusion after standing long in a confined space, or vibrations from the church. But with the superstitious minds of the time, it became proof that Elizabeth was not at rest. Historians still debate whether these stories were products of collective imagination. Many believe Elizabeth's ghost was nothing more than a product of shared fear, like when you watch a horror movie and your heart still races after leaving the theatre, because your brain hasn't shaken off the tense atmosphere. But others believe that a person carrying so many obsessions as Elizabeth, after death, could hardly have a soul that vanished immediately. The whispers in the night. Have you ever experienced being in a quiet place, yet hearing wind twisting inside your ears? Many visitors reported that when walking through the corridor near Elizabeth's tomb, they heard whispers hard to explain. Some swore they even heard a short, dry laugh, like the cough of an old woman. A few guides even added, "Perhaps it is the bitter laugh of Elizabeth, who once held an empire, but in the end could not hold her own body." Was it? A detail few notice. Some Victorian writers once came to Westminster to hunt ghosts. They recorded that at midnight, candles in the abbey often suddenly went out when passing Elizabeth's tomb. Scientific explanation: drafts. But when you sit in a pitch-dark church, hearing the creak of wood, every small thing can turn into an obsession. Historians still debate. Were the stories of hearing laughter, seeing shadows, merely products of the Gothic culture of the time? The 19th century was the golden age of ghost novels and gloomy tombs. People often coloured reality to make it more fascinating. But exaggerated or not, these stories still proved one thing. Elizabeth did not only live in history, she also lived in the collective imagination of the English people. The second death and bizarre immortality. Official historical event. When Elizabeth's tomb was opened in 1868, instead of a preserved mummy, they found a living chemical experiment, a mixture of black tar, crumbling bones, and a red wig. From then on, the concept of Elizabeth's second death was born. Not the death on the sickbed, but the death when posterity witnessed her body disintegrating. A strange detail. Her heart, said to have crystallized into a shimmering mass, became a mysterious relic. No one dared to display it. It was only recorded in documents. If it existed today, it would be both a scientific and eerie treasure, perhaps placed behind bulletproof glass in a museum. Historians still debate, should Elizabeth be remembered as a great leader or as a symbol of human fragility? One side argues that mentioning the second death tarnishes the Queen's image, but the other side counters, it is precisely that truth which makes Elizabeth more relatable. She was not only a living saint, but also human, with all her weaknesses. When you hear this story at night, you see, the more it is told, Elizabeth's story becomes more like a long play. She once stood at the peak, once made the kings of Europe wary. But in the end, all that remained was a lead coffin, a few ghostly legends, and whispers echoing in the abbey. Imagine, if tonight you passed by an ancient church, hearing the wind howl, seeing the lights flicker, would you remember this story? Perhaps you would smile, thinking, luckily I am only hearing it, not a monk who had to sleep in Westminster Abbey. Just a joke. But indeed, hearing a story in a warm, safe bed is far more pleasant. And when you close your eyes, remember, Elizabeth I is immortal not only because of her victories, but also because of the ghostly legends surrounding her death. You may feel a little eerie, but also reassured, because every ghost exists only in imagination, and imagination is the very thing that lulls you into deep sleep. Look again. The image of Elizabeth I is not only in history books, but alive in the imagination of many later generations. She has been recreated on stage, in novels, and even on the big screen. But the interesting thing is, that image is not always of a great queen with a scepter in hand. Sometimes, she appears as a ghost, a chilling symbol of power mingled with decay. Elizabeth, in popular culture, official historical event. As early as the 17th century, plays of the Stuart era had already mentioned Elizabeth as a legendary figure, a queen beyond time. By the 19th century, when the Gothic movement spread in England, Elizabeth's image was further imbued with a ghostly hue. In many short stories, she appeared again in Westminster Abbey, not as a goddess of light, but as a spirit lurking in the shadows. A strange detail. In London, there is a nighttime tour called Ghosts of the Abbey. The storyteller often adds that if you stand near Elizabeth's tomb and whisper a prayer, sometimes you will hear a whisper in reply. Tourists shiver, while the guide smiles quietly, for they know part of tourism's charm lies in that eeriness. Historians still debate, should Elizabeth's image continue to be exploited in a ghostly way to attract tourists and film audiences? One side argues that it distorts her image, the queen who led England into its golden age. But the other side counters, it is precisely those legends that keep Elizabeth's name alive in collective imagination. If she were remembered only as a dry politician, the public might have long forgotten her. From the screen to dreams, you may have seen films about the Tudor dynasty, where Elizabeth appears radiant in a gold-embroidered gown, with piercing eyes and fiery red hair. But in some modern works, she is portrayed in moments of weakness, deep eyes, trembling hands, and even the fear of seeing her own face in the mirror. That is the truth mixed between history and legend, a queen both powerful and fragile. A strange detail few notice. In some contemporary theatres in London, when recreating Elizabeth, directors ask makeup artists to apply powder so thick it cracks, as if her face were about to collapse. The audience feels both admiration and shivers. And that is the effect art aims to create, to remind that even glory has a dark side. Historians still debate whether emphasizing fear and decay diminishes Elizabeth's political achievements. But from a cultural perspective, it is precisely that mixture, between history and legend, between light and shadow, that makes her immortal. A touch of light satire. Don't you see, Elizabeth was both a political figure and a kind of Hollywood star of the Tudor era. She had scandals, romantic suspicions, a public image, Virgin Queen, and both fans and anti-fans across centuries. If there had been tabloids back then, headlines would surely have read, "Elizabeth secretly meets the Earl of Leicester at midnight. What is the truth?" Or, "The Queen's beauty secret, lead powder and never looking in a mirror." Hand of Lee. Another joke. If Instagram had existed, Elizabeth would surely have used black and white filters, because the true color of her skin no one would dare look at. Symbolic meaning. What matters is, when you hear this story, you realize Elizabeth has become a symbol beyond time. Not only the queen of an empire, but also proof of human fragility. From death in loneliness, a suffocating lead coffin, to ghostly legends, all of it has made her live forever in collective memory, both revered and feared. Official historical event. England under Elizabeth transformed, laying the foundation for the later empire. But the strange detail is, posterity remembers not only her victories, but also the eerie stories surrounding her death. And historians still debate, are we being fair to Elizabeth, or are we more fascinated by tragedy than by triumph? You are listening to this story in a quiet space. Perhaps outside the window, the night wind still murmurs. Perhaps the fan is creating a soft background hum. And you realize Elizabeth, though she has lain down for more than 400 years, is still here, in imagination, in storytelling, and in the whispers of history. Now, take a slow breath and imagine we are closing the curtain of a play that has lasted 400 years. Elizabeth I, the renowned queen, who once made kings across Europe tremble, now lies in a lead coffin, her body turned into a bizarre experiment of time. But behind all the eeriness and ghostly legends, what matters most is, what do we learn from this story? Lesson about the transience of power. Official historical event. Elizabeth reigned for nearly 45 years, turning England from a weak nation into a rising power, ushering in the Golden Age. No one denies that achievement. But in the end, no matter how many victories, how many eloquent speeches, she could not escape human fate. Her body decomposed, becoming a strange mixture beneath the earth. A strange detail. Her heart transformed into a red-black crystal, gleaming like a poisonous gem. The Victorians were puzzled, not knowing whether to call it a treasure or a nightmare. That story reminds us that power and fame, no matter how brilliant, eventually turn to dust. Historians still debate, should Elizabeth be remembered as a great queen or as evidence of human fragility? Perhaps the answer lies in between, for it is that very fragility which makes her achievements precious, because they were built within the limits of a finite human life. Lesson about obsession with appearance. Elizabeth spent her life hiding age and illness beneath layers of white lead powder, but it was that very mask which contributed to her failing health. It sounds distant, yet ask yourself, how many people today still struggle with other kinds of masks? Social media filters, staged images of perfection. A light joke. If Elizabeth lived today, she would surely be an influencer, with a smoothing filter so strong that even the camera would fail to recognize her real face. But then, just like her, we would realize, no powder, no filter can stop time. Listen about rest. Elizabeth feared lying down on a bed because she thought death would come. And in the end, she truly experienced a restless death. Her body unquiet, her coffin a chemical furnace, her soul tied to ghostly legends. That story stands as a metaphor. When we do not learn to accept finitude, that very denial turns into an obsession that lingers forever. A strange detail few know. After her death, Queen Victoria ordered royal burial practices to change. Simple, swift, without elaborate chemicals. It can be seen as a late gift Elizabeth left behind, the realization that sometimes simple peace is the last gift a person needs. You are listening to this story in a quiet room. Perhaps you have your own worries about work, about the future, or simply about a long, tiring day. But remember, if even a powerful queen could not take anything with her beyond memories, then you need not carry too heavy a burden on your shoulders. Historians still debate Elizabeth's final image, but you and I can draw one certain conclusion. All of us, whether powerful or ordinary, share the same journey, from birth until we return to the earth. And precisely because of that, what matters is how we live each day, not how we cling to an eternal image. Do you hear the wind outside the window? Imagine it as a whisper from the past, reminding you that history is not only to be told, but to illuminate the present. Elizabeth I passed through like a storm, brilliant, full of controversy, and leaving an indelible mark. But tonight, as you close your eyes, let her story become a gentle reminder. Live fully, but also learn to let go, so that you can rest when night falls. And now, relax your shoulders, take a deep breath, and let your breathing flow as evenly as the distant bells of Westminster. No more ghosts, no more obsessions, only peace waiting for you in sleep. You have travelled with me on a very long journey, from the trembling final days of Elizabeth I in Richmond Palace, when she stood for hours refusing to lie on her bed, to the moment death descended and the embalming ritual began to turn her body into an unwilling chemical laboratory. Then we descended into the Westminster tomb, witnessing what happened when the lead coffin was opened after more than 2 centuries. The red wig still there, melted wax, the crystallized heart, and the entire body becoming a bizarre symbol of human fragility. If you think again, it was precisely the blending of history and legend that made Elizabeth different. Other monarchs also reigned long, also left political marks, but their images in the memory of posterity often faded, leaving only numbers and dates. Elizabeth was different. She was praised as a great queen, haunted by an unquiet death, and seen as the central figure of a ghost legend. The glory of a queen? Official historical event undeniable. Elizabeth led England out of chaos, built the image of a strong nation, and opened the era known as the Elizabethan Age. Shakespeare wrote immortal plays under her reign. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe, and the Spanish Armada failed under her command. The English called her Gloriana, the glorious queen, and the Virgin Queen, a symbol of purity and pride. At this point, Elizabeth was like a torch shining in European history. But then, remember that behind that light, there was also the darkness of private fears, eccentric habits, and physical decline. Habits that created obsessions. Elizabeth hid her fear of aging beneath thick layers of lead powder that corroded her flesh. She avoided mirrors as if they were enemies, believing that looking in one meant facing death. She feared the bed, to the point of standing for days until she collapsed. And instead of bathing regularly, she used perfumes to mask body odor. A strange detail. She kept dozens of jars of perfumes and powders in a locked cabinet, only opened when needed, like a sacred ritual. Her ladies-in-waiting had to learn to apply her makeup in the dark, without mirrors, relying only on memory. If you imagine that scene, it is both romantic and eerie, like a performance meant only to hide an undeniable truth. Her body was falling apart. Historians still debate, did she truly believe in those superstitions, or were they only signs of a mind haunted by power and aging? The answer will likely remain vague, but those habits contributed to turning her death into a chain of tragedies, where the body did not decay naturally, but transformed into something grotesque. The second death, in 1868, when the tomb was opened, posterity witnessed an unimaginable sight. Elizabeth's body was not withered like a mummy, but had turned into a mixture of tar, crystals, and a wig. People called it the second death, not the death on a sickbed, but the death when the body was exposed as a horrifying testimony to human fragility. A strange detail. Her heart was said to have become a gem, like mass, red and black streaked with silver and gold. Many Victorian scientists were bewildered, not knowing whether to classify it under chemistry, mineralogy, or medicine. To them, it was a toxic gemstone, beautiful, but one no one dared to touch. Historians still debate. Should this detail be made public to reveal the truth, or kept secret to protect the Queen's image? Some reports were even censored, passed along only by word of mouth as a secret, and that very tug-of-war made the story even more mysterious. Ghostly legend. For centuries, monks and visitors at Westminster told of strange sounds near Elizabeth's tomb, hissing, whispers, even bitter laughter. People said the stone floor sometimes beat like a heartbeat, or candles went out suddenly when passing by the tomb. Perhaps it was only drafts, or the sound of expanding metal. But in the collective imagination, Elizabeth became an eternal ghost, never at rest. She stands as proof that power may be immortal in memory, but the soul remains haunted by its final fears. Lessons for us. So, after all, what do we learn from this story? About power. Every throne, every victory, eventually becomes ashes. What remains is not specific triumphs, but the impression left in the hearts of future generations. About appearance and obsession. The more we try to preserve an immortal image, the more likely we turn it into tragedy. Only by accepting limits can we find peace. About rest. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Elizabeth is this: no one escapes death, and the best way to face it is to let go. Let go of power, let go of obsession, let go of false masks. A light joke to ease you. If Elizabeth had known her death would be studied by the world for hundreds of years, she might have thought, well, I guess that's one way to become immortal. 80. You have travelled with me for nearly an hour, through the light of the rain, the darkness of the tomb, the strange habits, and the ghostly legends. And now, as the story closes, I want you to take a deep breath, then exhale slowly. Let the wind outside the window become a gentle background melody. Let your breathing flow evenly, like the distant bells of Westminster ringing. Elizabeth I, with all her tragedy and glory, is now only a memory. But you are still here, in the present moment, safe and peaceful. Today may have been long, may have been tiring. But now, you no longer need to carry anything more. All worries, all obsessions, let them fade away like a small candle in the night burning down its wax, leaving only a gentle light. You deserve a deep sleep, with no ghosts, no sighs from the past. Only the warmth of the present, and peaceful dreams waiting ahead. So, I wish you a night truly calm, truly gentle, a sweet dream, free of burdens. And when dawn comes, you will wake with a light soul, as if just returning from a long journey, carrying not obsessions, but a peaceful smile. Sleep well.